ahead on Capitol Hill. Fired acting U.S. Attorney General Sally Yates set to testify at a Senate hearing on Russia's alleged election interference. She's expected to recount her warnings to the White House regarding former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's ties to Russia. This is the first time Yates is speaking publicly after being fired by President Trump for refusing to defend
treatment that would keep cancer from returning to patients, possibly for the duration of their lives, by working with the body's own immune defenses.
We really try to figure out the way to make it happening and make it effective for cancer, and I think today we have the technological tools.
Dr. Chiara Bonini is altering disease-fighting T cells to go after cancer. Her team has found a way to track the effective cells with the greatest longevity. In Pisa, Dr. Deborah Angeloni has identified a protein that helps cancer spread. If that protein, MECAL2, can be safely targeted, a cure could be within the sights of this highly motivated team. On another campus of the same institute, another breakthrough. Together with a Swiss team, researchers have developed a bionic finger that can actually allow amputees with prosthetics to feel texture. A sensor run over a surface sends signals to the nerves that translate them into sensation.
The technology converts the mechanical interaction, the physical interaction with our sense of touch into a sequence of pulses that are delivered to the nerve.
This bionic finger right now can tell the difference between smooth and rough textures. But the end goal is to make it so intelligent, so sensitive, that it can tell the difference, for example, between silk and denim. There are ways to go on all these Italian studies, but for now, they are stirring excitement in the international scientific community. In Pisa, Italy, Amy Kellogg, Fox News.
A report from the World Health Organization finds 9 out of 10 people around the world live in areas with excessive air pollution, with 92% of us living in places where air quality exceeds limits set by the UN agency.
It is extremely important to put this data outside for politicians to understand, for citizens to be aware of this, for countries to take action.
The WHO says outdoor air pollution causes some 3 million deaths each year. When combined with indoor air quality, that number jumps to 6.5 million annually. Nearly all of air pollution-related deaths are caused by non-communicable diseases, such as cardiovascular problems, stroke and lung cancer.
These particles can go inside your lungs, they can attach to the arteries, they can block your veins, your arteries.
The organisation lists inefficient modes of transportation, household fuel burning and industrial activities as major sources of air pollution. Natural occurrences such as dust storms can also play a role. Southeast Asia and the Eastern Mediterranean are among the hardest hit regions.
In Europe, in North America, there have been a major effort in cleaning the air, although there is still room for improvement.
The World Health Organization is launching a Breathe Life campaign meant to raise awareness of issues related to air pollution. It encourages things like walking, bike riding and energy-efficient homes to help improve air quality. In London, Kitty Logan, Fox News.
In 2008, before Obamacare was instituted, Washington Times online opinion editor Cheryl Chunley's husband, Doug, suffered a massive heart attack that put him in a 10-day coma and ICU. But thanks to around-the-clock care, he came out of it, a fate that Chunley says would never have happened under Obamacare. Here with her story is Washington Times online editor Cheryl Chunley. Cheryl, great to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Ainsley, thank you so much.
You're welcome. So tell us what happened to your husband and why you say if your family was insured under Obamacare, he would not be with us today.
I'll try and be brief, but this was a very long ordeal. In 2008, as you said, I was at work and I got a call from my husband's boss saying that my husband had had a heart attack and had been transported to the hospital. When I went to that hospital, they were in process of airlifting him to another hospital, and I had to go home and get our 4 kids, aged 13, 12, 6, and 1, to meet him there. During the flight, his potassium levels dropped and he went into a coma. And he stayed in that coma for 10 days, during which doctors and nurses, they had 2 teams working round the clock to save his life. His heart couldn't start beating again. He actually had to have a balloon pump inserted to keep the blood flow going, and because of that, he ended up having his leg amputated. There were several health problems after. There was a lot of surgeries after. He came finally out of the coma. No brain damage. All glory to God on that. Yes. Perfectly healthy. But the thing is, why I say he would have died if he had been on Obamacare at the time, we had top-notch private insurance provided through our employer, my husband's employer, and the nurse that we met up with a few months later said that had we been on Medicaid or Medicare, some kind of government-run insurance program, day 3, they would have pulled the plug. They would have done a let-and-see type of situation to see what could happen.
Wow, so that actually does happen. And that would have happened under Obamacare, she's saying?
Well, if Obamacare had been in effect at the time, it would have been a government-run program where they picked and chose what care to give him. Mm-hmm. And she said that there was no way they would have provided the 2 teams of intensive care service around the clock.
Wow. Even though the president at the time, President Obama, was calling these so-called private insurance companies evil. Remember that?
I do remember that, and that's the thing that has really nagged at my husband and I for years since Obamacare has gone into effect. Everything that Obama said was happening at the time didn't actually happen with insurance until the passage of Obamacare. That's when we started getting our high deductibles, our co-pays that were out of the world. We couldn't choose the doctor. We had to switch medical providers. All that stuff happened after the fact.
Wow. So the amputation, the helicopter ride to the hospital, the ambulances, how many days was he in the hospital, did you say?
Oh, he was in the hospital in a coma for 10 days, but then he had about 30 days total in the hospital. Wow. Then he had months of home health care.
And I read you only had to pay $1,200?
$1,200 for the helicopter airlift. It was unbelievable.
So were things better then than they are now for our country?
Oh, definitely better. Definitely better.
Cheryl,
private market.
I'm glad your husband's still with us and there to help you raise those 4 beautiful children. Thank you so much for being with us and telling us your story.
All right, time for some quick headlines on this Monday morning. A win in the war on terror for the Trump administration. The Pentagon just confirming the leader of ISIS in Afghanistan, Abdul Hasib, killed in last month's elite special forces operation. 2 U.S. Army Rangers, Cameron Thomas and Joshua Rogers, also killed in that particular terror takedown. And it's the newest tool to stop truck bomb attacks, and apparently it's very effective. Watch this. There you got video showing the moment a truck is upended and obliterated in an anti-terror barrier test in Germany. The test driver was seriously hurt. The barriers being tested to stop future truck attacks like the one last year in Nice, France. All right, Brian.
All right. Hey, don't mess with Texas. Have you heard that before? Sanctuary cities now banned in the state after Governor Greg Abbott signed the bill into law overnight. Now, Governor Abbott joins us right now. Governor, what does this mean?
Well, first of all, I was proud last night to sign this law. This law effectively bans sanctuary cities in the state of Texas. What it means is that no county, no city, no governmental body in the state of Texas can adopt any policy that provides sanctuary. Second, what it means is that law enforcement officials such as sheriffs are going to be required to comply with ICE detainer requests. What this law is going to do is to engender greater cooperation between local law enforcement and federal officials so that we ensure that everybody is going to be simply following the law. Now think about this, Brian. Isn't this quasi-insane that we have to pass a law to force law enforcement officers to comply with the law?
So give me an example of complying. For example, if I pick somebody up and I'm a local sheriff, and if they are somebody that cannot provide any paperwork, do I now have to call ICE?
No, sir. That is not what the law says. If someone is apprehended, taken to jail, what is done is a request is run through a computer system to find out whether or not there is an ICE detainer request pending. If there is, communication needs to be made with ICE. If there is not, nothing else happens other than the usual local law enforcement process.
So if a sheriff or a mayor does not comply with what the governor says, you said they could face ramifications. What ramifications?
Right. First, by them not complying, what that would mean is they have adopted a policy that promotes sanctuary city policies, which means that they would be not complying with the law. If they do promote sanctuary city policies, what it means is they could be subject to jail time. It means they could be subject to being removed from office. It means that their city or county could be subject to fines and penalties of up to $25,000 per day.
Wow. So here's what Sylvia Garcia says. She's a state senator. She says, quote, "I'm afraid this legislation will lead to harassment and profiling of Latinos. And this is the last thing any of us would want. This bill would go from a broken taillight to a broken family to a broken faith in our system." Does she have legitimate concerns?
That is nothing but wild rhetoric that's divorced from reality. First, remember this. And that is the people who are coming into the United States, especially across the border in Texas, are coming not just from Mexico. In fact, most of the people coming across the border in Texas are not from Mexico. They're from people around the entire globe. So this has nothing whatsoever to do with those who are Hispanics, point one. Point two, most of the Hispanics who are in the state of Texas are here legally, and they have absolutely nothing to worry about. Point three, it is illegal for a law enforcement officer to racially profile anybody. And so if somebody does that, the law enforcement officer will be in a lot of trouble themselves. This is simply a mechanism such that when someone who has a criminal record who is wanted by ICE, they're going to be held and detained and turned over to ICE. If you are here, regardless of what your status, and you have not committed a crime that makes you subject to an ICE detainer, you have no problems whatsoever.
Got it. So the governor's doing what the president wanted the whole country to do, but right now it's been stuck in the court systems. You're not waiting for it to get unstuck. Governor Greg Abbott, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, coming up straight ahead, Hillary Clinton is full of excuses for why she lost the 2016 election. But our next guest says that only means one thing. She's running in 2020. And she was Secretary of State during the start of the war on terror. So what advice would Condoleezza Rice offer President Trump? She actually started as National Security Advisor. She joins us live next.
Well, it is our great honor to have with us the former Secretary of State and author of a brand new book. It comes out tomorrow. It's called Democracy, Stories from the Long Road to Freedom. And Condoleezza Rice joins us live right now. Good morning to you.
Pleasure to be with you.
Rex Tillerson, who now has your job, you're one of the people who suggested to Donald Trump that he consider him. What was it about that guy, the gas guy, that you thought, you know what, he could fill my shoes?
Well, first of all, he was a terrific CEO, but he was an oil man. And oil people know the world like other people don't. They have to make long-tail investments in really difficult places. They have to deal with difficult people. Their people are often working in very harsh circumstances. Sounds like Secretary of State. And I really thought that he and the president might connect as business peers as well.
Had they ever met before that?
I don't think so, but I'm sure that then President-elect Trump knew of him. Everybody knew of Rex Tillerson. He had a stellar reputation.
And how is Rex Tillerson doing now?
He's doing really well. He's doing really well. I think he has a very good relationship with the president, which, by the way, is the most important thing a Secretary of State can do, is establish that relationship. He is speaking out. I thought he was brilliant, by the way, in Moscow, when he said that the Russians, with the chemical weapons ban that they'd supposedly gotten with Assad, he said they were either incompetent or they weren't telling the truth. I would never have had the nerve to say that, but good for him.
And he did have a one-on-one meeting, too, and Bob Gates also recommended him, I understand, with you to do that, so I think it went a long way.
And you guys used to play golf together?
We did. We played golf together.
They say all these deals happen on the golf
course, but also, right? Including in the AT&T, where you're a little nervous and you're trying to help each other out. So Rex is a great person.
One of 3 women accepted to be a member of Augusta National, which is a big deal.
That's right.
So important for the Secretary of Defense. You didn't have this to get along with the Secretary of State. Yeah. They seem to be getting along. In fact, I understand they meet to get on the same page even before they go to see the president.
Absolutely. And I know Jim Mattis very well as well. He was at Hoover for a number of years as a senior fellow there. Now, I did have a great relationship with, particularly with Bob Gates, and it matters a lot when the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense can say to all the people below them, look, don't try to bring about conflict between the two of us. We are going to work together. And then that message goes down through the entire government that the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense are working together.
Exactly. Now, Vladimir Putin, very few people in this country know more about the Russians and Soviets than you. Did you predict when you met this deputy mayor standing in the corner, as you write in your book, that this guy would emerge as this dominant power for Russia? And what has he done to that country?
I did not. And I didn't even, when I first met him as president of Russia, some number of years later, when President Bush and I met him in Slovenia, I didn't think we would see what we have seen. But we now know that he was harboring deep resentment about the end of the Cold War. He's a former KGB officer. He saw the collapse of the Soviet Union, as he said, as a tragedy. And he really believes he is reestablishing Russian authority, Russian influence in the world. Unfortunately, if you have to take the territory of Ukraine to do it, well, so be it. And what you have to do with Vladimir Putin, because he respects strength, he tries to intimidate. If you're not intimidated, he respects that. You have to establish the rules of the game. And the rules of the game are, we are not going to allow Russia to threaten our allies in the Baltic states or in Eastern Europe. We are never going to countenance the fact that they have taken the territory of Ukraine. And if you establish those facts, and by the way, I also think what President Trump has done in rebuilding the American defense budget is sending a very strong message that America is back in the game.
Should we send arms to the Ukrainians? Should we have instead of blankets, and should we now?
I would arm the Ukrainians. I don't think you want to be very careful about how you arm any group that is facing an insurgency. We sort of learned that lesson in Afghanistan when we found weapons on the other side. Right. But we should indeed arm the Ukrainians. Let them defend themselves. Since when is it a bad principle that people who are trying to defend themselves don't have the means to do so?
You talk about finding, in your book called Democracy, finding democratic openings in other countries. When you have a totalitarian government that collapses, like what we've seen in Syria, is there a chance for democracy there?
The hardest case is when a totalitarian regime is either overthrown or collapses because you don't have any institutions underneath. When you think about totalitarian regimes, they control every aspect of life. Even in authoritarian regimes, you might have a little bit of civil society or maybe a free university here or there. Those are the hardest cases. And one of the things I really wanted to say with this book is don't think that all democracy promotion is like Iraq and Afghanistan. Those were the hardest cases where we went there for security reasons. We didn't overthrow Saddam Hussein to bring democracy. We did it because he was a security threat. Then we said the Iraqi people need a pathway to democracy. But those are the hardest cases. We've also helped Colombia to reclaim its future from the FARC. That was an effort at democracy promotion. We helped Kenya after a really bad election to find an answer.
When the president told the president of Kenya, you need to step down.
That's
How'd that go over?
He did.
Right. Sure. So I want to talk about where your book starts, and that's our Constitution, because it's being debated again. As an African-American woman, do you see yourself in this Constitution? Do you think that when we look at 9 of our first 12 presidents as slave owners, should we start taking their statues down and saying we're or embarrassed by you?
I am a firm believer in keep your history before you. And so I don't actually want to rename things that were named for slave owners. I want us to have to look at those names and recognize what they did and be able to tell our kids what they did and for them to have a sense of their own history. When you start wiping out your history, sanitizing your history to make you feel better, it's a bad thing. But let me just say one thing about our Constitution. That Constitution originally counted my ancestors as 3/5 of a man. And then in 1952, my father had trouble registering to vote in Birmingham, Alabama. And then in 2005, I stood in the Ben Franklin room, one of our founders. I took an oath of office to that same Constitution, and it was administered by a Jewish woman Supreme Court justice. That's the story of America. The long road to freedom has indeed been long. It's been sometimes violent. It's had many martyrs, but ultimately it has been Americans claiming those institutions for themselves and expanding the definition of we the people.
Does it make you think less of, should we think less of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson because they were slave owners?
Well, they were people of their times. I wish they had been like John Adams, who did not believe in slavery. I wish they had been like Alexander Hamilton, who was an immigrant, by the way, a child of questionable parentage from the Caribbean. I wish all of them had been like that. And Jefferson in particular, a lot of contradictions in Jefferson. But they were people of their times. And what we should celebrate is that from the Jeffersons and the Washingtons as slave owners, look at where we are now.
Sure. Where we are now is we have a president by the name of Donald J. Trump.
Yes.
I know, over the last couple of years, when he was running, maybe he wasn't your number one guy on the list.
No, that's right.
How's he doing now?
Well, he's president, and I respect the presidency. I respect anybody who gets elected to that office. And I think he is really starting to fill in the job. It's hard. He's the first president in our history who had absolutely no experience in government of any kind. He's brought really excellent people in, great national security team, and you're starting to see him feel what the American presidency can do. When he said about those Syrian babies, I can't watch Syrian babies choking on chemical gas and not do something about it. That's the President of the United States speaking.
We were talking earlier and in the green room, and you said you think he's getting a little more presidential.
Well, I think he's really feeling the weight of that office. When you walk into the Oval Office and you've got Abraham Lincoln on the wall and he saved the country from the dissolution of the Civil War. And over there's George Washington, who, despite the fact that a third of his troops were down to smallpox, he managed to win the Revolutionary War. And then there is a Democrat like Franklin Roosevelt, who rallied the people to defeat Adolf Hitler. And so you feel the weight of that presidency. You're sitting behind Roosevelt's desk. I think you see it. And the American presidency is the most special institution in all of human history. And the person who occupies it has to be about the presidency, not just about himself.
Right. And do you think that, are you surprised that you saw President Bush, a lot of blowback on President Bush. Yeah. Are you surprised about the volume of pushback on this president?
Well, it has been louder than any in my experience. And maybe it's partly the fact that it was an unusual election of someone who had not been in office. It came out of a very important moment in our history. Someone has called it, a friend of mine, the Do You Hear Me Now election. People who felt that they were not being served by their institutions. And so perhaps it exposed some of the divisions in our country. And, we all talk about divisions, but let's remember, and I hope what we'll get to, is that America is an idea. It is not nationality, religion, ethnicity. It's an idea. And that idea is you can come from humble circumstances and you can do great things because the founding fathers promised you life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And one reason that I wanted to write this book is I wanted Americans to start with our own story of struggle to make that right. But then to recognize that we're at our best when we also stand for that for others. It can't be true for us and not for them.
That you were talking about taking the oath. Are you planning on running for president one day?
Oh my goodness, no. I do not have that DNA.
You gave it some thought, though.
Well, doesn't everybody? But no, I ran for president of the Rice family, and that's good enough. I won at age 4.
And you're doing great stuff at the Hoover Institute. This is an incredible book, and I'll talk to you more about it on radio.
You bet.
In a short time.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rice.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
All right, straight ahead on this Monday, Hillary Clinton full of excuses for why she lost in November.
I was on the way to winning until the combination of Jim Comey's letter on October 28th and Russian WikiLeaks.
By saying that, our next guest says it could only mean one thing. She's running again in 2020.
Plus, we're celebrating National Pet Month with these adorable and adoptable dogs. Brian, you need another one.
No, Will Condoleezza Rice adopt a dog on television. It's never been done before.
I just want to celebrate another day of living. I just want to celebrate.
Hi, this is Fox Extra. If you're watching us in Australia on Foxtel, thanks for tuning in. Have a question or comment? Email us at foxaroundtheworld@foxbusiness.com.
Bullying has long gone on in person, but as use of the internet and other electronic devices grows, bullies have gone online, launching their attacks around the clock.
Cyberbullying is pretty prevalent. We find that with kids and adolescents, it's a pretty big problem right now. Lots of kids don't really know how to socialize with each other appropriately, and online platforms just give them another way to interact where they're not monitored by parents or teachers.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's latest data shows 16% of adolescents have been bullied through their cell phones or the internet. The result can leave kids without self-esteem, feeling anxious and depressed, and parents feeling helpless. Experts say keeping the lines of communication open can help.
So I think parents need to have general conversations with their kids about being able to speak up for themselves. So for some kids, that'll come naturally. They'll be able to assert themselves and to tell a bully, stop, I don't like it when you talk to me that way. This is not okay. But for other kids, they may need more of an advocate.
If you find out your child is a victim of cyberbullying, the first step parents should take is to collect evidence, which means having access to your child's social media, as well as taking screenshots of their phones.
Parents have to be open with their kids. We need access to your phone so that we have evidence to support the fact that you are being bullied. So, yes, we want our kids to be able to use their social media and use their phones as they want. But what's more important is that we keep them safe.
Telling your child you need to take action and see what they've posted online may cause some additional anxiety. Psychologists say while it may be uncomfortable for you both, you need to write it out.
It's normal for kids to freak out when they're confronted with the possibility of their parent going to administration or going to another parent to let that person know about bullying that is happening. So that's some natural anxiety that might come along with not wanting to confront a situation. Not every kid will freak out. Some kids may actually be relieved that their parents are stepping up for them.
Researchers are trying to get more evidence on cyberbullying and its effects, but this is difficult as studies and surveys may not always accurately capture social media trends. In New York, Laura Ingle, Fox News.
Well, former First Lady Hillary Clinton full of excuses for why she lost in November. Watch.
I was on the way to winning until the combination of Jim Comey's letter on October 28th and Russian WikiLeaks raised doubts in the minds of people who were inclined to vote for me but got scared off.
Okay, that was her last week. Well, our next guest says her excuses only mean one thing. She's running for president again. Joins us right now, Pulitzer Prize winning columnist Michael Goodwin. Where do you get she's running for president again out of that?
Well, look, Stevie, there's an old thing in politics that once you've been bitten by the presidential bug, there are only two cures. death or election. And she's still alive, so she's running. Look, this new group she has formed called Onward Together, which sounds suspiciously like Forward Together, her old group, her election campaign group, is very much about co-opting the Trump resistance. She's going to raise money to fund the resistance, she says. Now, that's going to give her an enormous amount of power and control over the resistance, over the money. And I think that right now the Democratic Party is demoralized and divided, defeated across the country, state elections as well. They don't have a clear leader, and I think she very much wants to be the leader. And let me just make one more point. Now, if she's the leader of the Democratic Party, do you think she's going to do this for Andrew Cuomo or Cory Booker's presidential campaign?
Of course.
So ultimately, I think she's setting herself up to be the 2020 nominee.
But if she is the resistance, that was her argument last time. I'm not Donald Trump. Elect me president. That didn't work out.
That's a very good point. And when you hear her make those comments about I would have won if it weren't for Comey, if it weren't for Russia, it's a very tired argument. And I think she's going to have to be a different person if she's going to win the election.
And then you have Jen Psaki, who worked in the Obama White House, say over the weekend, the perception of her was baked into the cake for about 10 years. Yeah. So it's like we knew what she was going to be like when she ran, we got what we thought we were going to
And 6 months later, here she is again, repeating the arguments as though, as you say, I'm not Donald Trump. Look, the Democrats are lost right now. They are continuing to make that same argument that she made. We're not Donald Trump. And it's getting them nowhere with the public. A recent poll shows 67% of Americans think the Democrats are out of touch with the country.
Real quick extra question. Who is the leader of the Democrats right now?
Well, there is no one. I mean, you have Tom Perez running the Democratic
National
Committee.
Well, then she should move right in.
That's exactly it. There's no obvious candidate for 2020. There's no real leadership in the Senate. I mean, it's very much about following Bernie Sanders and the rabble. So there's no leadership in the party overall. I think she is aiming for that vacancy.
All right. Michael Goodwin, thank you very much. He's got a great column on that at NewYorkPost.com. Michael, thank you very much. All right, straight ahead, we are celebrating National Pet Month with a pet fashion